The CGA Tour, a podcast unlike any other. Now your host, Calvin Alexander.
Hello and welcome back to yet another episode of the Calvin Glen Alexander Tour, or the CGA Tour as it's better called and known. All things Oklahoma State here from respective former Oklahoma State employee and currently someone who drives from Oklahoma State to Stillwater every single day. But we're glad to bring on here the guys from Bleav and OKSTATE podcast here, two former Cowboys, and Nathan Gilsleider and Justin Southwell. How's it going, guys?
It's going great, man. I appreciate you having us.
Yeah, thanks so much. You got Justin rejoining here. Back when I had you on the first time, I think we were talking about Ollie Gordon getting his first start or so, or
I think that was it.
Snaps, and then met you up in Stillwater in that very dreary kind of game there against, I Bleav, West Virginia. And
that's right.
Yeah, we were some of the diehard loyal and true fans. One of the few that were in attendance for that game. So it's nice to meet you on that day. And I think I met your dad as well. So
yeah,
it's nice talking football with you guys.
Yeah, well, if you're going to bring up my dad here, I do want to give a quick plug and shout out to the Remember the 10 run. My dad is the founder of that run, and it is April 19th in Stillwater, 8 a.m. So love to see you there, and continue on for the 19th annual run, I Bleav it is, if I'm counting it correctly here. So 20's next year, but we got 19 on the 19th here this year. So with that being said, wanted to talk some, of course, the Oklahoma State football season, I think you guys have talked about a lot here from past year, and I've talked a lot about as well too. But I don't get a chance every single day to talk to guys like you guys with an intense background with Oklahoma State football, of course, now covering the team as well too. So want to ask you both here, just kind of to lead it off with, what's your favorite memory while at OSU, both on campus and on the team?
You got one that comes right to you, Justin?
I do have a couple. All right, so on the team, it really is. So it is difficult to point to one specifically, right? But finding out that I made the team was obviously the one that kicked everything off. So when I initially tried out, went through all they weren't combine drills, so we did the 40-yard dash, did the bench press, did a vertical jump, did a few of those agility drills, testing all that stuff. There were probably about, 75 to 100 guys. So I thought that the odds of making the team weren't that great. And I initially didn't make the team. But then I followed up with Coach Yielding, just letting him know I was like, I'll see you guys in January. I'm excited to go try out again. Is there any way I could work out with the team just to be able to, be around the team and to elevate myself in preparation for January? He said, I'll tell you what, come by my office after you get finished with class. We'll talk about it. So as it turned out, one of the receivers had quit just like a day before, and it opened up a roster spot for me. So that was, it started from there, but obviously going from finding out that I had gotten on the team to us winning the Fiesta Bowl, there's a multitude of great memories in between that. But the one of the ones that really, really does stand out, though, is running out of the tunnel onto the field in front of 62,000 just raging fans. It's that feeling that courses through your body, that adrenaline rush. It's unlike anything I've ever experienced before. So Bedlam specifically in 2011, that night game, it was just incredible. So.
Yeah, I think there's two that I always remember. There's so many, but, being the first team to open up the West end zone with the Georgia game, right? That was such a big one. I'm biased, but, that team really felt like the beginning of something, right? When you go back and look at that roster and you talk about who was there with us at that time, Zach Pettigrew, Parrish Cox, Russell Okung, Des Bryant, you know what I mean? So you're talking about guys, right? And there's so many more than that, but that game was so important to Oklahoma State. Number one, it was really cool because of how many people were around and I'm excited for it. You had Boone, in the locker room with Barry Sanders, Robin Ventura. I think Jerry Jones was there a couple of days earlier because he was redoing some things with his brand new stadium for the Cowboys at the time. And so, just that big of a deal that was resonating nationally. You had Georgia in town. And quite honestly, like, that game was closer than it should have been. We physically beat them up, and it was like, hey man, like, we're Oklahoma State now. You got Georgia in here, and we weren't physically overmatched. So that was a big one. And then obviously for me, my senior night was the Wheaton to Blackman, Colorado game. So, that one I'll always remember, because I think if anybody that was on the team at the time, obviously, Zach was by far and away our leader. There was no question about it. But you talk about from like a pure talent standpoint, like, we knew, at least I felt I knew, when Brandon got his opportunity, like, we were going to be just fine. And obviously it played out in the way that it did. And, I can't say anybody knew that was going to happen, but you knew that Brandon had an incredible amount of talent. It was just a matter of time before he got a shot. And so that was a really memorable one for me.
And I also have another one. So you mentioned on campus. I had to say this too, because obviously not everybody knows this, but I did meet my wife at OSU. So taking her to a steak dinner at the Atherton and asking her to be my girlfriend, it's got to be at the top of the list. But I've also got to say, another memory that I love is that fall semester in 2009. I had started up. I just made the team as a walk-on. I'm connecting with my teammates, meeting a lot of new friends, especially other walk-ons, right? You're just connecting with those guys because we're on our own, we're not with the scholarship guys. So a few of the walk-ons and I had formed a flag football team for intramurals. And it was kind of strategic in the way that we put the team together, because we wanted to fly under the radar, make sure that nobody was, calling us out for being on the team. So it was strategic in that way. But we had Jace Chilcote at quarterback, who was throwing no-look passes before Pat Mahomes. We had Perry Watson, Mike Robb was out there, Hollywood legend Anthony Hill, Nick Cash. So I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple of guys. Has been 15 years now. But P. Watt was the captain, so our team name was the Swagger Jackers. And for our first game, we're walking up to sign in to let the people know we're all checking in, getting ready. They got those white fold-out tables or whatever on the intramural fields. And one of the student volunteers behind the table said, "Hey, are you guys on the football team? Because football players aren't allowed to play intramural flag football." So I didn't lie, but I said, "Do I look like somebody that could be on the football team?" And apparently that was convincing enough of a reputation for us to get in.
Yeah. And
so long story short, we absolutely smoked some poor fraternity team. I mean, it was so bad, the NCAA would probably lay a violation on us if they knew about it, because we weren't even trying. There was no game plan. We didn't have plays drawn up, anything like that. But anyway, that obviously had revealed the truth that we were in fact on the football team, and we were no longer eligible to play flag football at that point. They had sent out an email declaring our team ineligible. So 1-0 national champs. That was great. That was really fun.
Well, to date myself here, I was a high school senior in that 2011 Bedlam game. Running on the field with my dad, 44-10 beating OU, getting a text from my baseball coach at the time saying, "All right, he's a lifelong OU fan." Always had banter with him about the whole middle school through high school. Right, the 1 year we win, with glasses and braces. I was never athletic enough to do anything in any level in high school, but was definitely running on the field, sending photos to him, talking about my baseball coach at that time. That was to date myself a little bit. Otherwise, I would think you were talking about my one flag football game ever that I played in for my fraternity that you just loved us, because it for whatever reason, if you just don't get lucky in those intramural games, they can turn out pretty bad.
They can. I think for me, so a little bit about my background. I came from junior college playing baseball and basketball before I got to Oklahoma State, and so I wouldn't trade my junior college memories and friends for anything. But you got like 45 people and 40 of them are your friend or your parents in the stands, you know what I mean? So it's like, it is what it is. And so you just play ball with your buddies, and it's just the best. But I will say, you know, like walk around was the first time it really felt for me like I was a part of something that was much bigger than myself. Obviously, you know, you're a part of a team and you realize it and you run out and stuff like that. But, you know, before we were one of the last teams. I don't know if Justin, if you guys got to, I don't think you guys did in 11. So, but you know, we would go to the Atherton, but we actually got to go to the walk around the night before the game. That was kind of our thing. You either went to the movie theater or whatever it was that they had planned for us. And so we were one of the last teams that the coaches allowed before it just kept getting too big to where it made any sense to do it. So, you know, just being out there with your teammates and being able to go see the walk around that takes over the whole campus and realizing like, hey man, like this is generations and this is something that you're going to be a part of for the rest of your life with your kids and your friends that are right here with you in this moment. And so I think I always look back on that, and it just like, that was the first time it felt for me like I was a part of something really, really big. And so I'll always remember the walk around for that reason.
I feel the same way and I really did try to soak it all up in the moment, even though I wasn't able to fully participate in everything. You know, the walk-ons aren't invited for everything, but the little things like the walk, the prayer circle, you know, before heading into the locker room, playing catch pregame and just trying to snag some one-handers in front of the crowd that gets there early, stuff like that, you know, and even just sitting in my locker and examining Southwell stitched on the back of the jersey. Everything felt surreal to me. Like I had unlocked this whole new world. And basically, yeah, from that moment on, taking everything in and just really enjoying it. So it was an absolute blast. Heck of a time.
All right. Well, now I want to ask you more about Coach Gundy here. You know, he's just finished up his 20th season, which seems incredible to me because I remember I was in first and second grade when Les Miles went the back-to-back, or I think actually it was second and third grade when Les Miles went back-to-back, beats OU. But then the first time that Gundy, of course, beats OU is just when you're, you know, on the team, and it's one heck of a feeling. But since then, he's, you know, beaten him only, you know, a couple more times, and granted, reigning champs. But what do you guys think about Gundy and his tenure at Oklahoma State? Do you think he's changed over time as a coach, and kind of what kind of coach he is? More of a player's coach versus a coach's coach, or been the same guy throughout?
From my perspective, he's changed a whole lot. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just think that's just the evolution of college football and Oklahoma State in general. You know, when he first got there, and whenever I was there, you know, he was the OC or the co-OC or the, you know, quarterback's coach plus the head coach plus, you know, he was doing all the recruiting. You know what I mean? It was a young man's game at that time when he was a young man, you know, trying to turn Oklahoma State around. And I mean, you know, that was when he integrated the Cowboy culture, right? I mean, if like your shoes weren't in your bottom of your locker and they weren't turned the right direction, if your stuff wasn't on a loop, you're running, you know, like little stuff like that. And he was so hands-on and so a part of every little thing. It was a much smaller organization at that time, and it's a different game. And so from that perspective, and when you hear him talk about it now, and rightfully so, he's a lot more removed and a lot more of a CEO type, right? And that's for the better for the most part. You know, I think sometimes, and Justin and I talk about this a lot, and I think anybody that's ever played at this level, or even any level, honestly, but you know, we have this altruistic view of college football or at least we used to until things kind of changed, but of like, hey, you know, this is your football coach. It's just like in high school, he's your history teacher and you saw him and he knew everybody's name. And so it's like, you know, sometimes people get all this caught up in like when Coach Gundy talks and he's like, you know, he doesn't know every single detail about this guy. And it's like, well, there's 130 dudes on his roster and it changes every single year. And he's got to look at it from a upper view. And if he did that, he literally wouldn't have any time. Now, could he be better about some of that? Absolutely. But I think sometimes we get caught up in that. And so, you know, he has changed to a more of a CEO level. And it's easy for us because we get spoiled by all the wins and our expectations as fans and what we think should and could happen. But if you were to put some things like on pen and paper, with the resources and things that he has and has had to deal with compared to, until 2 years ago, Texas and OU and some of these other, Texas A&M, whenever I played, and some of these schools with unlimited funds, and he really beat up on everybody besides OU. And so I think we got so spoiled and got away from really looking at what he's been able to do from that perspective. And so he has changed a lot for me. I don't know how Justin feels about that, but I don't know if that's a bad thing necessarily. But from the guy that whenever I was there and he was the quarterback's coach and he was the co-OC and calling plays and on his sheet while the defense was doing their thing, and then look it up and then maybe I should call a timeout here because somebody said on the headphone, like that's a completely different guy than who's there right now.
I'd agree with that. And if you wanted to make an argument that he hasn't changed much, I would say that I've always gotten the feeling that he wholeheartedly cares about the program, his coaches, his players, with the condition that the player also cares about the program and the coaches and their teammates. If anybody has an issue with Coach Gundy as a player, I feel like they're the ones that they don't put forth the effort to completely buy in to his culture, his system. And then, Coach Gundy, mate, you just referenced it. He doesn't have time to win over somebody that doesn't want to buy in. So I can see how that is going to rub some people the wrong way, of how he's not, the player's coach that they would expect going into it, because that's what people hear probably on the recruiting trail. He's a player's coach. But he can also be blunt and unapologetic, and that's going to rub people the wrong way, But some people love that about him. You're going to hear people in the world say, "Be yourself," and then Coach Gundy, he's himself, and not like that. We don't mean it like that, So anyway, from his tenure, I can see that being consistent throughout, and the things that I mentioned, he cares about the program, players, coaches, and he is blunt and unapologetic. But to Nate, your point, he's had to change. He's had to evolve, because you don't stick around in one place for as long as he has without putting forth that effort to make that happen.
Yeah, I think his core, to your point, right? His core has stayed the same. I think his fundamentals of what he believes that makes a team successful, or how you become a successful college football athlete, I think has largely stayed the same. Right. He talks so much about, certain things. Right. But it definitely has changed some, but I agree. I think, nobody, and that's the thing that always cracks me up too. Is like, nobody hates losing more than Coach Gundy. Nobody hates losing more than the players, but you know what? Like, he can't carry that over to Sunday morning because he's got to watch film and get ready for the next game. And so I think a lot of people misinterpret some of the things that coaches or even athletes will say after the game, because you can't hang on to it. If you do, you're already at a disadvantage. And I guess that's enough on Coach Gundy, but I think that's the gist of it. It's part of it. Like, everything's evolving. And honestly, Justin and I have talked about this some, like, with as long as he's done it and how he's done it and what he's had to do to be successful, with how it's done now, I really am not. If you don't think that he loves Oklahoma State now to put up with the way that college football is interacting at this moment, then I don't know what to tell you. Because coaches are getting out of this as fast as they can, because it's not the game that they started their careers with. And he is still here. Some people wish he wasn't, whatever. He's here and he's all in. And I think that speaks volumes of he loves it, and he loves Oklahoma State, and he doesn't want to be anywhere else.
Do you think part of it has just he wants to go out on his own terms? He doesn't want to have to be forced out. He wants to be able to retire on top. I mean, last year, I'm not saying there was any doubt in my mind he wasn't coming back for this year. But
right.
Do you think part of it is, hey, he's going, you know what? I mean, he still is. What's wild to me, he's still younger than my dad. My dad's in his 60s. So I'm like, My dad is 60, so it is one of those weird things to me where I'm like, all right, he's not that old, but he's just been coaching for so long at the same time. He got his first opportunity very young in his career. But do you think it is one of those where he will decide when it's time? He wants to at least be able to do that.
Yeah, I feel like that's fair to say. I mean, I'm not necessarily comparing him to Tom Brady by any means, but people were calling for Tom Brady to retire halfway through his career. They're like, dude, you played for 10, 11, 12 years now. When are you going to hang it up? And he just kept getting better and better. I'm like, sure, he retired. He maybe retired earlier than he even wanted to. But he decided, all right, I'm going to go ahead and hang it up at this point.
Yeah.
Gundy, I feel like, is in a similar position. And he's got his Yankee job. Who would want to just give that up and go into an early retirement? Go out on your own terms if you can. I just feel like that's...
It's like everybody loves their favorite athlete or their favorite coach because of the ego. But then when the ego doesn't suit you, you don't like him because of it. And so, I mean, make no bones about it. Coach Gundy's got an ego, right? Of course he does. He's a very successful man in a very competitive field, and you have to believe in yourself, and you are the right person for the job, and you know better than anybody else. Like if you're questioning if somebody knows better than you, you're losing. Now, that doesn't mean like you can't get input, but if you think that, I don't know if I'm the right guy for this job, then you're not going to be successful at it. So I think absolutely he wants to go out on his own terms. I think, his ego in the fact that he's given quite literally his adult life to this program, and he wants to make sure that when he puts his name on it, and it will be there, it will be Mike Gundy Field at Boone Pickens Stadium, that it's where he wants it to be, and it represents the hard work that he put into it. And, I absolutely, I think that. And I think, he completely turned over the entire staff, right? I mean, if the coach, if he didn't want to go out on his own terms, he would have sat down and been like, I'm keeping my guys, right? No, he's going to go out how he wants to go out, and he's going to turn it. Hopefully he's going to be able to turn it around to a point to where he's comfortable with it, his name being on it. And I don't know if that's 5 or 10 years from now or whatever it may be, but I agree with what you said. I do think some of it is ego, and I definitely think it'll be one of those things on his terms. I hope it's not, and Justin and I've talked about this some too, like you hope it's not one of those Bill Snyder-esque, like, hey, you probably should have left 2 years ago. It's getting a little, listen, I don't think it'll be that way, because I think coaches make so much money now that he can just go drive around on his tractor and listen to the radio and do whatever he wants. But I hope he's able to do that, and I hope it coincides well with where Oklahoma State's at and where Oklahoma State needs to get to continue.
I feel like it's a little bit. It's very similar to what you're talking about with Coach Snyder, but the different era of college football. Coach Gundy has a responsibility to hang it up and not hold the program hostage if it is in fact his time to go. And I think he would understand that and realize that. Whereas Coach Snyder, it's status quo, same old, same old. I can hang out for another year or two. Coach Gundy believes in himself to be able to put Oklahoma State in preparation for this new era of college football. And he wants to be the one to lead them into that. And I believe in him. So I hope that it works out well with this new coaching staff.
Well, I don't want to take too much away from Gundy's whole entire tenure as, hey, last season 3-9. But Nathan, to your point here on the roster sizes changing year over year, and Justin, to your point as well too about Gundy being his own guy and doing what he needs to make the changes. How do you guys think the change is now from 130 guys on the roster to 105? Also with all the transfer portal changes. I mean, what do you guys think Oklahoma State can be looking at going, hey, we've got an advantage maybe culturally and how we put together our staff or how the program is or whatever? Just, I'm much more into the, hey, let's look on the bright side of all these changes and what could be working well for Oklahoma State instead of talking about how that, hey, I wish the NIL fund was bigger. Because that we're always going to wish for in my mind. But trying to see from what you guys think of what are the what are the possibilities right now of, hey, I'm looking on the bright side of it when it comes to Oklahoma State football because of this, and this that we're able to do?
Yeah, whenever I look at how he structured this coaching staff and what he wants to do, and how he wants to fill the roster with a certain type of individuals, Oklahoma State has to act more like a small market baseball team. It's not the Yankees or the Dodgers, right? You're not Texas or Texas A&M. You're not quite the Tampa Bay Rays. You're kind of like in the middle there, to where it's like you have enough money to spend, but you can't spend it on the wrong dudes. Otherwise, it sets you back quite a bit. So I think from a cultural standpoint, Oklahoma State needs to stay the same. And you see that a lot because you have to find the right dudes. And then from the recruiting standpoint, because number one, Stillwater's not for everybody, but once you get here, it's for a lot more people than you think. And then number two, there still has to be a level of development. And I think we saw that a lot in this first couple of years of NIL. Some of these teams that tried to spend so much money on players, and it's just like, okay, that didn't look right. You guys are nowhere near the talent of what it should be. So there has to be that perfect blend of being able to develop guys and also bring in impactful players that can help you right away. And that's the tricky thing to do. But I think when you look at what Oklahoma State has done, let's just say from an offensive perspective, there's 4 guys that either coached or played offensive line at Oklahoma State that are on the staff. I don't think that's by accident, right? Coach Gundy has always been and will always be a run-first coach. And sometimes that doesn't always look that way on the field because sometimes you don't have the personnel to do it. But to his core, he believes you run the football to control the game and then you throw off of that, right? I think he got away from that some in 2011. But quite honestly, that if we want to be fair, that wasn't his decision to hire Dana. That, some of those things that happened there ended up working out, but that's not who he is at his core. But when you're talking about bringing in Andrew Mitchell, Cooper Bassett, Coach Meach, and then our other tight end coach who also coached offensive line before, you've got 4 guys there that all know how that has to work and what that has to look like and the kind of individuals that you need to have. In Oklahoma State, to the university's credit, when they go all in, that's what they do. We've done it in other sports. We did it with all of our on-campus buildings, and I don't think that'll be any different in the NIL era. We just have to figure out how that's going to look and what that's going to look like for the university. But I think it's not doom and gloom, but we have to figure out and we have to adapt quickly to it. And I think they're trying as best that we can until we get more legislation and action to get some guardrails on it.
Yeah, for the roster size changes, I hate it in a way because guys like Nate and me wouldn't be on the team because we were in that last group of guys. But at the same time, I think it presents itself as a really good opportunity for development. You're going to have less guys on the roster, more opportunities and more reps in practice for those guys to accumulate and build up over time. I think that they have a chance to be better than they would if there were more players on the team. With the transfer portal itself, I think ultimately the way that it's played out, thankfully, it's probably about a zero-sum game in the end. I think when we initially looked at it, it's obvious it's being abused. It's obvious that there are coaches tampering and things like that. And people want to point out how awful the transfer portal is when a player leaves, but it isn't met with that same enthusiasm when we bring somebody in. And I think Oklahoma State has done a really good job of balancing it out. So, from the aspect of potentially developing players with the intent that they'll play for your team and they transfer out, absolutely, that sucks. There's not really anything you can do about that. And unfortunately, sometimes programs are going to reap the rewards of all your labor. But it doesn't seem to me like OSU is hurting in the sense that we've become a farm team for other programs, Big Ten, SEC, and things like that. I feel like for the most part, it's balancing itself out.
Yeah, I think to your point, Oklahoma State, and this is something that I think some universities are starting to, especially if you're not Michigan, if you're not Ohio State or somebody, it's like, hey, why in the world am I paying $2.5 million to a high school offensive tackle? He's never set foot, right? Oklahoma State will never be able to do that, nor should they. That's not even good business. I would much rather, hey, you know what? Ollie Gordon's season didn't go how we hoped it would go last season. A lot of factors. But I feel much more comfortable as a fan. Again, not my money, whatever. I feel much more comfortable as a fan knowing, hey, at least we gave the guy money who gave something to Oklahoma State, developed here, stayed here for the fans, right? So I think that's something that I think, to your point, Justin, we're starting to see a little bit more is, hey, this money's going to dry up soon enough. This is not an unlimited fund. Even the richest schools, like, this is not unlimited. So we are going to have to start figuring out, like, I'm going to be able to spend here or there on a couple freshmen, and then I'm going to spend my money here for a proven commodity. And I think a little bit it's starting to help out some recruiting as there's become a little bit more structure to it, because it's like, hey, you're not in my money bubble. I'm not going to spend any more time on you. Now, if you're in my bubble, I think I can get you. Here's a price tag that's similar. Can I get you on campus? And then we can go from there. So I feel like it helps Oklahoma State be a little bit more aggressive, because for so long we lived in a realm of recruiting guys that were unheralded, then they would blow up, and then they would be decommitted and then go away. Like, you look at, for instance, like somebody like Calvin Banks at Texas, right? If he would have ended up at Oklahoma State, they could have completely changed everything. You got a first-round draft pick at left tackle, a kid that was committed to Coach Dickey since he was a sophomore. NIL opens up. Oklahoma State's slow to it. Texas says, here you go, out the gate. Kid, I don't blame the kid. Kid's getting paid, goes to Texas, has a fantastic career, is going to the NFL. I mean, we've struggled at left tackle, right? That could have changed everything. So it's just stuff like that. So I think as we continue to grow and evolve in this and get a better understanding, we just have to be more proactive, I think, than maybe we have been some in the past.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. I don't think we're ever going to get the Jahmyr Gibbs, who's playing at Georgia Tech for so long, and then all of a sudden the SEC comes knocking down the door, and one SEC team outbids the other one at the very end. And heck, he goes to Alabama. He gets drafted, of course, like top 10, top 15 in the league. So I'm not trying to say he didn't work out well for Alabama, but he didn't rush for 2,000 yards either. He rushed for less than 1,000. Right. He's just Jahmyr Gibbs. His measurables alone got him drafted that high, but it's not like another Alabama running back in that same room could have had the same production, is all I'm trying to get at. I don't think we're in the door for those guys when they're just adding to already a big number. But I do love the idea, of course, and the heralded stories of we're getting the James Washington of the crop, right? Like, we're getting the guy who's 2-star who, hey, you know what? We found him. We scouted him. We saw potential, and maybe that's Haas Haney. Maybe that's, Zane Flores initially, and that's how we got to be on the inside track with him for so long, to recruit him to Oklahoma State and stay on the roster too through all these different fluxes and changes and other quarterbacks bringing in as well. So,
yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I also want to ask you guys, of course, about the expectations for this season. Not necessarily like a win-loss prediction record, because, heck, we haven't even had our, spring scrimmage or spring practice or whatever it is. Everyone's falling in Gundy's footsteps with that too, though. I
was going to say, can we give Coach Gundy some credit, because we got killed for it like 5 years ago when we did away with it, and now everyone's like, yeah, we should stop doing this. It's like, yeah, you should have stopped doing this.
Yeah, well, and also just shout out to OU. You can sell at a spring game, and then it got you a national championship. Oh, wait, hang on a second. But
there you go.
I mean, with all that being said here, what are you guys' kind of expectations for this season, and how you think it'll at least look? Do you think it'll be a different offense, kind of what we saw last year, or more of the same?
Yes.
And defensively, same deal.
I would say that I'd expect the offense to improve with the new play caller, right? So we've been stagnant for a long time, and I think Coach Meacham, he's going to be able to show us some stuff that we haven't seen in a long time. Dunn had an average points per game ranking of 52nd in the nation over the past 5 years. Throughout the decade prior, we averaged 18th in the nation. So we're dying for Coach Meacham to turn this thing around. And, with that decade that I've referenced, that was with multiple offensive coordinators. So Oklahoma State, this is like the lifeblood of Oklahoma State football. And for the last 5 years, we haven't been living it. So I expect Coach Meacham to come in and turn it around.
Yeah, I think one thing that Justin and I have talked about a lot last year is like the level of compete seemed to be missing. It was like you're penciled in here, you know what you're going to do, and it seemed kind of stale from the jump. Like, what are we not competing for positions? Are young guys not going to get shots because what we're doing right here is not working, right? So, and you see it a lot in the messaging and things like that coming from the players and the coaches and social media and things. So for me, what I'm looking for and what I expect to see is a whole lot more compete, a whole lot more of, hey, if you start game one at quarterback and it doesn't go well, let's go, right? Like, now there's a certain I take tongue in cheek, there's a certain level with quarterback you got to hang with them, but you get my point. Is like, hey, this is no longer, you've been here for 3 years, this is your turn. No, hey, we're getting paid now, and you're getting paid to produce, and if you're not, you're out. Like, I wish it wasn't that way anymore, but this is what we are now. And so I expect to see a whole lot more of that. And quite honestly, like, I just expect to see a lot more fresh ideas. You've got Coach Mitchell, who was a head coach before at junior college, and now he was an offensive line coach at Utah State, and same with Cooper Bassett, and they had some really creative run stuff that they were bringing in. And Coach Meach comes from Kendall Briles TCU style offense with a lot of spread and go. And he ran it both with a running quarterback and with a quarterback that didn't run quite as much. So, there's things like that. You have heard often in the last several years, Coach Gundy talk about how much pressure a running quarterback puts on a defense, and we have not had a running quarterback. So I'm like, what are we doing here? You know how much it stresses you, but you don't even have one, which is always kind of I didn't understand how we were recruiting. Now, I think when you look at a guy like Haas Haney, even Flores, and we even saw it a little bit from Rangel in the BYU game, he's got enough juice to get around a corner if you can show something in the run game, right? So I think there's something there that is going to be different. I think the quarterback mobility is going to be brought way more into play, because the only way that works is if you have a quarterback that can kind of stand back there and throws. If you have a dude right? If you have a Justin Blackman, a Des Bryant, a James Washington, that's going to command a double that you can take the top off with, you know what I mean? Otherwise, you have to add that element to draw that defender down, hold him in the box. So that's what I expect to see offensively. I think defensively, I expect to see a whole lot more multiple. Last year, we were just getting our mail read before every single play. And it was so hard to watch. And I know that we were limited a lot. Part of it's the coach's job because they did a poor job recruiting because guys were not ready to step in when guys went down. That's on you. Part of it is the two most important players on your football team went down a week apart. And what are you going to do? Right. That sucks. So it's twofold there. But for me, I expect to see a whole lot more multiple, defensive looks, a lot more exotic blitzing, not quite Jim Knowles because Jim Knowles is a savant, but closer to that where you have the hybrid players that are able to do both, and you've seen us kind of put that in. So I just what I want to see is just a certain level of compete that comes with the standard of excellence that should be expected at Oklahoma State. You can't blame the guys for kind of resigning themselves to what was going on the last couple of games of the season. It's just so difficult to fight that. But like the guys that are still around that were there for the Kansas State game, that were there for the Colorado game, some of those games that was just like, what am I even watching on this field? Like the effort level that's unacceptable. Like that's not Oklahoma State football. Like that's got to get out. That's a disease. That's a cancer that you have to weed out. And whether that's coaches or players, you can't accept that. Otherwise, the guy next to him is like, hey, man, you didn't yell at Kendall Daniels for not running after he got smoked. Why are you yelling at me? I'm not going to give the extra effort. I'm not going to go double whistle in practice or whatever it may be, right? So that's what needs to change for me because it bled over to the field. And you heard Coach Gundy even talk about that some towards the end of the year, how he got away from that because he felt like, we were getting so thin on some bodies that he wasn't maybe holding guys on the defensive end accountable for some of the mistakes they were making in practice. And it started carrying over to the games. And the effort level was, to be blunt, embarrassing. And that's just unacceptable. And so I think now that guys are getting paid and now that you're trying to bring back a level of compete, hey, either give effort or you get out. I think that's what it needs to be.
Yeah, Justin, did you want to add at all? Say that?
Nathan's just full of great points all the time. What came to my mind immediately whenever you were saying that about the effort and the wholesale changes, obviously the coaches are changing, so they're not going to put up with that crap because you got a completely new set of guys in, and they're reevaluating everybody they have on the roster. It's up for anybody to grab their position. Mm-hmm. Where if you didn't necessarily change that, what are some ideas that you could throw out there to eliminate that cancer? And I thought back to maybe it was around the 2007 OU football team, for example. They got rid of the nameplates on the back of the jerseys. That was the message. We're playing for the name on the front, no names on the back. This team with like Adrian Peterson. So yeah, they turned it around. And that's one example, but I'm sure that there were a lot of other things internally that we don't know about, and I'm sure that they would have had to do something similar to that, but thankfully
I think they're doing that right now, right now.
Absolutely, they're doing that right now.
Because you're in the thick of training right now. They're doing the team drills and and everything right now. They're competing on a daily basis right now, and that's when that stuff is forged. So to your point, Justin, I would imagine that Coach Glass turned the clock back a little bit on maybe some of the things used to be, and turned up the heat a little bit. So that would be my guess on one of the first things that they did.
Yeah, I would think so. You probably would tread lightly in that sense a little bit because you've got the transfer portal. People can just jump in whenever Coach Glass looks at them the wrong way, right? I'm not getting paid enough money to be here and to take this crap. I'm going to go somewhere else. I don't think we're in that position anymore. I think it's time to put up or shut up, and guys are you should be ready to work.
Yeah. And you always want to be in the room with other people who want to be in the room. You don't want to be with somebody looking at the exit door.
100%.
I wonder with last year, and Nathan, you just mentioned it too, with that K-State game, 48-0. I mean, I just immediately was going to turn off the TV. Like, all right, like 3 possessions in for K-State and 3 possessions in for us. It's like, all right, what are we even doing here? I mean, we're just the UCF game as well in the rain, and then last year the Colorado game. What can lead to some of that in the locker room? You said some cancerous kind of guys and stuff. Maybe there's those guys who are looking at the door or already looking beyond the season, or what brings someone to that kind of mentality, I guess?
There's a twofold. I think it's either number one, you start like looking out for yourself. Number one, right? You're making business decisions. You're like, hey man, this call sheet doesn't involve me very much. I'm not. I'm good. Number two, I mean, you brought up the Kansas State game last year is like the perfect example of why we needed to change offensive coordinator. Because if you'll remember in that game, we get that turnover. We're on the 20-yard line. And then you run the 3 most abysmal plays that you could possibly run. You kick a field goal, you miss it. They go down in 2 plays and score, and then it's like, that's it, right? And so it's like stuff like that. So it's like there was a clear disconnect from a belief system of what you were doing from a game plan perspective, because once it went south, it went way south. And so for me, when I see that, it was like there's no belief system. And like, Justin, it's like when Dana drew something up, you guys believed it was going to work. And, when Coach Monken was like, hey, boys, this is what we're going into the week with, you're like, hell yeah, we're going to score 45. Right. And you always heard rumors and things like that from Coach Dunn because of the way that he was as a wide receiver coach and like his demeanor and stuff like that. Like from the people that I talked to that were around him quite a bit from that perspective, like there was just really no belief system because it was so stale. And it was from a perspective of like, hey, it's like Novocaine. We're going to keep doing what we're doing and eventually it's going to work. It's like, yeah, okay, cool. I get that from a certain perspective, but you also have to add some belief in there. And I think you saw that when you go back and look at the few games last year where, they kind of got away from us. Just like you look at the BYU game, you look at a couple of the games to where we actually did get some momentum going in those games, and you saw the belief really build, and you're like, hey man, where's this been all year? The guys are starting to fire off for each other and do certain things. And so when I see teams that collapse like that, it's a belief system in what you're doing. You don't believe in what you're doing when you get out there. And then number two, a lot of it was CYA. Like you're looking out for you and yourself. Mm-hmm. And hey man, like I'm not going to sprint back on the defensive side because it's going to make me look like I got burned when in actuality the guy over the top was supposed to have the coverage. So I'm just going to make it kind of stay that way because when we go to the film on Sunday, I don't want to get yelled at. Like, those are the type of things that you see guys start making business decisions, or even like, hey, I'm in the hole and it's one-on-one and I'm going to go ahead and lean a little bit and try to tackle him like this rather than getting my head across, and it's going to hurt. But if I don't, he's going for 60 to the house. Well, they went for 60 to the house a lot last year when it was one-on-one in the hole with one of our safeties, right? So that's what I saw. I saw not a lot of guys that were fighting for each other, especially towards the end of the year. And that's so hard when things are going so bad.
Yeah. For the defense specifically, I think the guys that were the leaders were unfortunately out with injury. So Nick Martin, Colin Oliver, when they go down, they don't necessarily have the vocal leader who can spin things in the right way. What I mean by that is there's a fine line between what looks or sounds like complaining and bitching and moaning versus holding you and your teammates accountable. Because you can say, this is BS, and leave it at that. Or you can say, this is BS, we need to turn it around, here's what we need to do.
Right, and to your point, Justin, it's a whole lot different than when Nick Martin says that, because you're like, hey, man, Nick Martin doesn't talk a whole lot, but he makes every single play. Yeah. And he's the one that's yelling at me because I was not where I was supposed to be. Yeah. When Nick Martin's out there and Robertson comes in, you're like, hey man, shut up. I'm doing my job. You do your job, right? He can yell at me all he wants, but he doesn't have the clout that Nick Martin does. So that's a great point, Justin. You lose your vocal leaders like that.
We already know that Coach Nardo, that's not his philosophy anyway. He's not yelling at players anyway. So he's going to lead that to the players, and if they're not the ones doing that, it's game over.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially if you don't have someone to step up, behind him. If Robertson's a former, guy who's a former walk-on, but hasn't played much at all. He doesn't have the background.
It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be anything special though. Like Robertson, he could have been the guy. I think back to Justin Blackman, whenever he was obviously the dude, and he was suspended for a game at Kansas State. You're thinking, no, we're screwed, right? No, nobody in the receiver room felt that way. Somebody had to step up. Bo Bowling stepped up. Isaiah Anderson stepped up. Mike Harrison stepped up. Joseph Randall caught some passes out of the back. Josh Cooper. It did not matter that Justin Blackman wasn't going to be able to play that game. And we won by 10 on the road. It's the leadership of Brandon Whedon, the coaches. I mean, it wasn't like a passive, I'm not going to yell at my players. It's like, we are going to hold you to this level. And it sucks that our guy's not here. He knows it. He's going to do better. He never missed another game. He held himself accountable for the rest of the time that he was at Oklahoma State. And then while there wasn't Justin Blackman in that game, guys were able to step up. And you got to be prepared. You got to be ready for whenever it's your time. When it's your time to shine, you got to shine.
Yeah, there's just a level of accountability that was missing last year. I think you just saw that, right? I think, and that's to your point, Justin. Those guys on that team, you had that success because everyone held themselves accountable, right? It's that cliche, do your job. That's it, man. Do your job. If you do your job and stop being like, hey, man, I didn't do my job because my safety or my linebacker or because my left guard missed the block, I didn't get to do my job as running back. Like, hey, man, sorry, that's football. What was your job? Did you get it done? No, I didn't. Okay. Hold yourself accountable. Stop complaining. So looked like there was a lot of that going on last year.
Yeah.
Well, what are you guys from this season? What's like the one game, I guess, besides UT Martin and Tulsa, where you go, all right, hey, you know what? I feel confident we're going to win this one. Is there one so far on the schedule? I know the whole roster changing over. Oregon's not the first one I'm checking off the bucket list here of games I feel the most excited about, and most. I was planning out last year. I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll go to the Oregon game this year. Not thinking about it right now, but a couple years from now, maybe we'll see.
We have homecoming against Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
I feel pretty good about that one.
Yeah, we pick that up.
I don't know if that's saying much, but
no, I think
it's homecoming, and we got to bounce back from what we did last year. So,
yeah, I mean, if you're talking about games that we feel comfortable that we're going to win. Yeah. The first one that I look at on there, just scrolling down, like we need to beat Arizona. Like that's a team you got to beat, right? You just lost your dude at wide receiver. They had a couple big dudes transfer out. they've still got their quarterback there, but that's a game that we need to win. And you look at the schedule, we go Baylor, Arizona after playing Tulsa. Like, those are two that Oklahoma State football needs to win. And that'll signal to me where we're kind of headed in a trajectory. Because it's like you said, Oregon is Oregon. I've got no ill-conceived notions about that game. Again, you can go up there and compete. You got nothing for moral victories, but you go up there and compete and you show that you're out there and you're lining yourself up and you're not backing down. That's going to show a whole lot. But for me, when I look at it early on in the season, after we go to Tulsa, or Tulsa comes here, then it goes Baylor, Arizona. Those are two games we need to win, and we should win. And then you got Houston right after that, which I think is going to be a very improved football team. But I think for me, when I look at it early on, it's definitely that Arizona-Baylor combo right there that we need to win.
Gotcha. All right. Well, we'll give the listeners a chance here to hear where platforms for you guys' podcast on Bleav in OKSTATE. I assume it's available everywhere, all streaming platforms, all good type of stuff here, but I just want to make sure.
I think so. Yeah, we have the majority of our listeners, I believe, are for Apple Podcasts, but you can find us on Spotify. You can find us on YouTube. Just Bleav is BLEAV. So it's a little bit different, but it's that Bleav network. So Bleav in OKSTATE. And then you can find us on Twitter X. All good stuff too.
Whatever we're calling it these days, right? Twitter or X or something.
I don't think I'm ever going to be able to just call it X. It just doesn't feel right.
Yeah, I've retyped it a couple different times, and I keep mixing it up no matter what. It's
always going to be Twitter to me.
I'm tweeting, or they're tweets. I don't know what I could be X or Xing. I don't know. That sounds such like an odd. It's not a verb. With that being said here, guys, thanks so much for Nathan and Justin for joining here on the latest episode of the podcast. If you're not already, please follow at the CGA Tour on Twitter, X, Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, everywhere you listen to podcasts as well. And check out the description here for a link to the Bleav in OKSTATE podcast as well. And Nathan and Justin, thanks so much again, guys. Hopefully have you on back again here before the season starts up.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it.
Yep, thank you.